What's up, YouTube? It's the Action Figure Grader coming back to you with another video. And GoCollect, which is the website I go to for a lot of my comic book information, they put out a pretty recent article that I wanted to kind of talk about and then maybe look at some data to maybe decide whether the premise of the article was correct or if I agree or disagree. And let me know in the comments after you watch this video what you think of the comic book market. For those of you that actually collect comics, whatever you collect, graded, ungraded. Me, I collect CGC 9.8s. That's what I collect. That's what I focus on. And so I thought it would be kind of fun to take a look at what the article says, first of all, and maybe interject some points based on my own personal thoughts. And then also take a look at some comics, some big comics, and see what the prices have done here recently. And has the comic book market hit a price floor? Obviously, during the COVID run-up, there was a massive jump in comic books, just like all collectibles, action figures, and everything else. But since COVID has kind of come and went to a certain extent, prices have come back down to earth in the comic book market, and we're seeing massive drops. And the question is, has the comic book market hit a new floor, and are we going to start seeing prices creep back up again? Well, a lot of it's tied to what you think the economy is going to do, and whether you think we're in for a recession. Me personally, I do, but let's first take a look at the article, and then we're going to take a look at some really big books that are either hot because of current movies that are out right now, or books that are always hot, or books that maybe are a little bit cooler based on what's going on in the movie and streaming market. And I thought it'd be kind of fun to get a snapshot of what those books are all doing and where I'm putting my money, the strategy I'm using right now for some of the big CGC graded comics. If you got Grails, I think now's a pretty good time to get it. And that's something that the article talks about. So this article was written by a gentleman named Don. It came out on July 8th on GoCollect.com. I will put a link in the video description to this article in case you want to go back and read it. And I love the kind of the thumbnail they use. Bulls versus bears, right? That's the stock market. In a good market, obviously, it's the bull market. Everything's going up, 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 kind of like what happened with COVID. In the comic book market, everything was going up. Crazy price increases during COVID as people were sidelined at home. They maybe had some more money to spend because they weren't going out to restaurants or going on vacations, air travel, things like that. Live events were all kind of shut down. So some people, not everybody, but some people used that extra money to invest in collectibles, whether it's comic books or action figures. And as a result, demand outstripped supply. It's a simple economics thing where supply was low versus what demand was, and prices really ran up in 2021. And since that time, prices have kind of come back down to earth, so to speak. And so here's what the article says. As you may have heard in the news, the stock market has officially entered a new bull market. And what is a bull market? That's when whatever the prices are, a price floor, or the lows for the stock market, if it goes up another 20% from those lows, that's the kind of the static or the kind of textbook definition of a bull market. And that's what's happened, right? We had, probably October-ish, October 12th, actually, as noted in the article, the market kind of hit a recent floor. And since October 12th, the market has been doing nothing but, for the most part, going up. And we've had a pretty big rise in the S&P, the Dow Jones, the NASDAQ stock indices. And if you guys remember from last year, I said that a recession is coming and that 2023 has all the earmarks of a coming recession. We talked about the inverted yield curve, where bonds with a shorter time frame in terms of the maturity date actually had a higher interest rate than longer-term bonds. And when those inverted yield curves happen, historically, a recession quickly follows. Well, in this case, I've been dead wrong, as I usually am. And for the most part, 2023 has held up a lot better. The American, especially consumer, has their spending power has held up a lot better than I expected. Obviously, about 70% of the U.S. economy is just people buying stuff, buying goods and services. And despite massive inflation, despite the Federal Reserve, increasing the target interest rate where banks lend at historic rates, they've jumped it 9 or 10 times now. Despite all of that, the employment has held up really well. And as a result, the stock market's held up well and people are still spending right now. So we have had a bull market. Inflation is now receding, which is true. The Federal Reserve has taken a pause on raising interest rates, although they came out recently. Jerome Powell came out recently on the Fed and said, hey, the employment market's still way too hot. We have historically low unemployment rate right now. So the Fed has come out and said they're probably going to continue to raise rates again after taking what I would consider a very brief pause. So I don't know if I agree with that. I think that the interest rates are still going to go up even more, and the mortgage market for home mortgages has adjusted accordingly. We've hit a new high around 6.9% as of the making of this video. So I don't know if I agree with that part, but inflation has started to go down, but it's still too high. So the Fed's going to continue to act on that. Unemployment rate is what's really holding up the economy right now. It still remains at record lows in spite of this high interest rates. And that's really the main story, and why I've been proven wrong as to why 2023, at least so far, has not resulted in the expected recession that I thought coming. So apparently Wall Street now thinks it's possible the Fed may achieve its soft landing, meaning that they can raise these interest rates and it's not going to crater the economy. They still think it's possible, and it might be. But I do think that the idea that the Fed might even start reducing rates in late 2023 or early 2024, as the author seems to note here, I think that's a pipe dream. I don't think the Fed is going to be lowering rates anytime this year or anytime in early 2024. I just don't see it happening, given that inflation's still sticky. You know, we talked about that in past videos as well, that inflation, once it starts going up, it's really, really hard to get it back down again. And that's been proven correct. So I don't know if I necessarily agree with his outlook, because I still think a recession is very probable. The sarcastic kind of way to look at it is that the government is going to do whatever your politics are. I'm not making a comment about Democrats or Republicans, but when you historically have an election year, which next year is, the government as a whole tries to do everything they can to keep the economy propped up, and then let the next administration, whether it's Democrat or Republican, deal with it after that. So it's very possible that we could continue to have a pretty strong or resilient economy through the end of this year and all through next year, because they're all worried about getting reelected. Follow the money trail, right? Politicians, the only thing they care about is power and money. And in order to keep their power, they're going to try to do their best to prop up and hold up the economy through the election in the fall of 2024. So we'll see. Maybe it doesn't happen, and because the Fed has been increasing rates, finally this house of cards falls down, so to speak, and we do see a recession next year. But it's anyone's guess what happens here. But the main question of the article is, will this bull run in the stock market and in the economy that's held up fairly well, will we see a new rise in comic book prices? And that's the question, because obviously prices have substantially cooled off throughout 2022, and it appears halfway through 2023. And for me personally, it's been pretty incredible to see the price drops for books that even pre-COVID, I didn't think that I would ever be able to acquire in my collection. But because prices have come back down to earth to pre-COVID levels, or even below those levels for some books, I have been able to add some pretty massive grails, personal grails, to my collection. And so for me, I'm really enjoying the fact that comic prices have come down, and they seem to still be coming down. The market has somewhat stabilized, I think. To me, for the books that I track across every line of comics, not just Star Wars, it does seem like we saw the very bottom of the market, at least for CGC 9.8s that I track, kind of in that January to March timeframe of this year. And since that time, there's been a little bit of a bounce for some books. Not all books. Obviously, not every book is going to follow the exact same price trajectory. Some books are going to be going up based on new content that's coming out. Some books are going to be going down because there's no new content, there's no demand, or the new content that has come out in terms of movie and streaming series has been bad. You know, if it's a bad show or a bad movie, that has dropped those books because there just isn't demand to have those key comics as part of that movie in your collection. And we're going to take a look at some examples here in a little while. So, Swaggle House, who's a YouTuber and probably is one of the best YouTubers. Him and Comic Book Investments are probably my two favorite YouTubers. Bronze Age Nerd is another really great comic book YouTuber. Those guys really follow prices a lot closer than I do across all the other comics. I really just focus on CGC 9.8s because that's what I collect. But they cover everything from Golden Age, Silver Age, stuff that is not even available in a CGC 9.8. So they know all of those really big, expensive books way better than I do. So you can go check those guys out. Swaggle House, Comic Book Investments, David over there. I've had him on my channel. And Bronze Age Nerd, Christopher. He does a great job. All those guys do great jobs. So you can go check them out. And they give some examples here. So you can read through the article. And the question is, did we reach the bottom a few months ago, January through March timeframe of 2023? Was that the bottom? And now we're going to see a more steady creep. Instead of the massive price spikes that we saw during COVID, are we going to go back to kind of normalcy, right? Where we start to see steady creep up in price for some of these really big books. And so on that note, what I did was I pulled out 4 books that are either hot right now because of current content that's out there, or they're not. But they're all really big books, and they're all kind of like books that I would either love to have in my collection or I've added into my collection. And I think it would be kind of fun to just to show you what a CGC 9.8 book for each of these, all 4 of them, have done kind of pre-COVID, during COVID, and where they are now, and maybe make some, extrapolate some thoughts on that. And so we're going to start with probably the best book, at least for us who watch my channel, and that's Star Wars #1, the first appearance of Luke, Leia, C-3PO, R2-D2, Darth Vader. And I pulled up the CGC 9.8 kind of price chart so you can just see how massive that price spike was during the COVID years, during the COVID boom. And as you can see here, GoCollect does a great job. If you're a member, which I encourage you to be a member, I am a member. They kind of give you lots of price data. They also give you the census information. And the key thing to remember about CGC 9.8s is, what's the CGC 9.8 ratio? How many of them are 9.8s versus all of the books for that particular book that have been graded? And in this case, for Star Wars #1, only 5.3% of every Star Wars #1 that's been graded by CGC out of 14,552 Blue Label Universal CGC graded books, only 768 of them have gotten the coveted 9.8 grade. And so that's only 5.3% of submissions. So that's why this book is so expensive in a 9.8 grade. There's just not that many of them. And given how big the brand is of Star Wars, there's a lot more fans than 768 that would love to have a 9.8 graded Star Wars #1. And that's what drives the price up. And so here's the kind of the sales price history. And if you go to kind of pre-COVID, which is kind of like the end of 2020, that's about when COVID kind of started, it was going for around $2,600. Thereabouts, between $2,300 and $2,600, maybe as high as $3,000. So this is one in December of 2020. It sold for about $3,000. So that gives you a data point pre-COVID. Now, during the spike, the absolute highest price that this book sold for is right here, $10,250. Somebody paid $10,250 for that book, which is crazy to me. But if you look at just kind of averages, it seems like the price spike was around $7,800 during COVID. That was kind of right during the height of the COVID market boom for comics, July of 2021. So somebody paid $7,800. Now, since that time, that book has had some spikes here and there based on, obviously there's new movie content and Disney Plus content. So it had some spikes, as you can see. But now where we're at right now, they're saying the present value is $4,700. That number is high to me. There's one that sold in an auction on July 6th for $4,700. That's a big, big number given where I've seen it sell elsewhere. Heritage Auctions, there was one that sold for $3,600. Another one fixed price, $3,900. There were 2 that just sold over at Comic Link between the prices of $3,400 and $3,900. So to me, to call it a present value of $4,700, that seems a little high to me. The 90-day moving average is probably more in keeping. The 90-day or even the 30-day moving average is probably more in keeping with where this book is right now, $3,780. And that's about right. $3,600, $3,700, depending on the wrap, depending on if it's got a new case, depending on the colors. There's lots of factors that can affect a 9.8 grade. But that gives you an idea of where it is right now. Versus back during pre-COVID, it was about $3,000. So it's still about, let's call it 20 to 25% higher than December of 2020. And a lot of you, several of you have said, hey, I think this book's going to go back down to $2,500. I don't know if it gets down that low because Star Wars 1 is a big book, but maybe it will. If we have a recession, I do think that it could happen. My target price is somewhere between $3,000 and $3,500. That's what I'm hoping to get it for sometime in the next 12 to 18 months. We'll see if that happens or not. It's a lot of money. It's a lot of money, and the content that's out right now doesn't seem to be exciting the market that much. Ahsoka Tano's Clone Wars #1, her first appearance comic, that's probably the only exception. That book has moved up quite a bit from December of last year all the way to, from about $1,600, $1,700. Now it's going for $2,200 to $2,400. So that book is the exception to the rule. But Star Wars 1 is held up really well. And it's actually a pretty big surprise to me that it's held up as well as it has, given what maybe some of the other books have done. One that has not held up well that I wanted to kind of compare that to is Batman: The Dark Knight Returns #1. This is from 1985, December 1985. Pretty iconic Batman book. It's kind of like it ushers in the Copper Age, in my opinion. And it's a Frank Miller cover. It's kind of the real true first modern interpretation of Batman, where he's jaded, he's more violent, he's older and kind of gruff. And I think that this was a big inspiration for the Dark Knight, the Christopher Nolan Dark Knight trilogy, that was, pretty incredible. And there's aspects of this book that were in the new Batman with Robert Pattinson. So because there's not really much new Batman content right now, I decided that this is a good book to target. And I picked this one up about a month and a half ago, and I paid $9.50 for my copy. And I wanted to at least show you what the book has done. Now, in terms of the ratio, the top 18% of them are in a 9.8. So much, in terms of the CGC 9.8 ratio, it's much higher than Star Wars #1, which is only about, 5 or 6% or whatever the number was. 5.3% versus 18.2. So it's an easier book to get in a 9.8, but still pretty tough. Still pretty tough for an 80s book. For a 1985 book, that's still a pretty low ratio number. And here's what the price has done. The price kind of pre-COVID was trading, let's call it about $950. $950 in November of 2020 was where it was selling. And that's what I just paid for it. So obviously this book has come back down to pre-COVID prices. And I decided that, after my tracking it and seeing what the prices are doing, it came back down to a number that I could live with. And so here is what it did during the height of COVID. The highest price ever paid for it was $29.80. So I got it for less than a third, or about a third of what the high was. And to me, that signifies it's probably pretty close to a floor. And you can see what the book has done since that high of about $29.80. It had some spikes, here and there, but for the most part, it's been on a steady trajectory downward, and it still is going down, in my opinion. Now it's at $9.91. When I bought my copy a month or two ago, it was kind of going $1,100-ish. Now it's down to the present value of $9.91. So what does that really mean? Well, to me, it means that you got to track these books, maybe look for books where there's no new content coming out, where no one's really talking about it, where demand is going to be lower and supply is going to be more plentiful. And I was able to pick mine up, including fees and everything. I paid about $9.65 altogether for mine. So I felt pretty good about that price. And it was a book I've always wanted. I never thought I would get it because I was looking back at some of these prices where it was going for $1,100, $1,200, $1,500, $2,500. I was like, well, that book has gone too high. I'm never going to see that again. Well, I was wrong. It came way back down again. And so that's just another example where maybe this book is not held up nearly as well as the first example, Star Wars 1. And it seems to be still on a downward trajectory. But because I think we're kind of back to pre-COVID levels that were fairly steady in price, anywhere from $750 to $800 over the last 5 or 6 years. And then pre-COVID prices, let's call it, $800 to $900. To me, I felt pretty good about paying $9.50 for it. Now, another book that's always going to be popular, and it's kind of like a blue chip 9.8, that would be Amazing Spider-Man 300, the first appearance of Venom. I'm just looking at the direct edition. Obviously, the newsstand is going to be quite a bit more expensive. This is another one that's got a very, very low 9.8 ratio, very similar to Star Wars 1. Only 5.3% of Amazing Spider-Man 300s that have been sent to CGC have gotten the 9.8. That's out of 27,000 plus that have been submitted. So it's very, very difficult to get in a 9.8 grade, mainly because of that black border right here. So, but anyway, the 9.8 ratio is that high. Now, let's see what this book has done. So pre-COVID, you're talking right around, let's see, I like to go to end of 2020. End of 2020, you were talking about $4,500. So this one actually had a spike, as you can see, pre-COVID. November 2020, it was already starting to really spike up, and it was at $4,500. Now, the highest price ever paid for a direct edition of ASM 300 was $9,200. So that's double what it was pre-COVID. So you can see that massive spike. But the spike actually started earlier for ASM 300, which is kind of interesting as well. Present value, we're back to $4,200 or so. And I've seen them go for less than that. I've seen them go for $3,600 to $3,800. So just depends. You can see some examples right here. $4,200, $3,800, $3,600, $3,700. So, again, this is a book you probably want to target in that $3,600 to $3,800 range. Based on some of the other sales that are out there. The 30-day moving average is $3,787. So this is a book that is probably actually selling for less now than what it was pre-COVID, which was, I call that, November, December. It was going quite a bit more. It was going for, November of 2020, one sold for $5,000. Now you can get it for, on average, 30-day moving average of $3,700. So this book is probably pretty close to a floor because it's come back to even below pre-COVID levels. And that to me means that's why this book is on my radar right now, because it's a huge, huge grail. Probably would be the biggest book other than maybe Star Wars 1 that I would ever get. And if I'm going to do it, now's a pretty good time to do it because it seems like the price is such that it's always going to be in demand, but it's still come back down to kind of levels where it was 3 years ago. So that's just another kind of example that maybe is a different trend versus the other two. And then finally, I want to talk about a book that's really hot right now because of Across the Spider-Verse. I've already gone on record stating that Across the Spider-Verse is probably one of the best animated movies I've ever seen. And Miles Morales is obviously the star. And so Ultimate Fallout 4, his first appearance comic in the first print, has jumped up a little bit, but it's starting to come back down to earth now, and now it's starting to get on my radar again. So it had a little bit of a jump right in here. April of 2023 was kind of like the more recent low of about $1,600 to $1,700. It jumped up pretty quickly after Across the Spider-Verse came out, and it was a huge hit to $1,900. But it's starting to come back down just a little bit. So now, as of July, it's closer to $1,800. So for this book, this is on my target list because it's been really hot, but I love Miles Morales. I love the animated movies so far. He's obviously going to have a live appearance at some point. Miles Morales is here to stay, and he's an awesome character. So I want the first print in my collection. But now's not a good time to do it because the book is still a little bit high relative to where it was. If you look back in 2020, it was going for between $1,100 and $1,200. So that would be an ideal price. I don't know if it'll get that low again because he's got a proven track record now of really good success in terms of movie content. Both Spider-Verse movies were excellent. There's a third one coming out next year. They've already kind of hinted there's going to be a live action series. So I don't know if we'll ever see $1,100 or $1,200 again unless we have a major recession. But the other thing to remember is this is a modern book. It came out in 2011, but it still has a relatively low 9.8 ratio. It's only 26% have a 9.8 out of 15,000 copies that have been graded. That's extraordinarily low for a modern comic book from 2011. Most modern comics, from 2010 to now, anywhere from 50 to 70, 80%, sometimes even higher, will be a 9.8. Nowadays, when books come out, they automatically get sent to CGC for slabbing, and 80 or 90% of them are 9.8s. So, but still, given that this is still a relatively modern book, it's got a very, very low 9.8 ratio, and it's probably going to continue to go down with time as more people who have beater copies go ahead and get them graded and preserved, even though they know it's not going to be a 9.8 grade. So, anyway, not every book moves the same, and I think these four examples show that. But if we've hit a price bottom, we certainly have on certain books, but you got to be really, really careful about what new content's out there and what demand is looking like, whether there's short-term temporary price spikes like you see with Ultimate Fallout 4. But I would wager that if you wait till this fall, like I'm going to do, this book will be even cheaper. So that's what I'm aiming for, is maybe this fall, maybe even early next year before the third Spider-Verse movie comes out. Try and get this book for $1,400 to $1,600. Wish me luck, because they may not get down that low again. We'll see. But I thought it was an interesting article talking about price floors for the comic book market as a whole, and I wanted to provide you guys some examples, and I'd love to hear from you in the comments. Thanks so much for watching, and I'll be back soon.